Well, it's Christmas season. Time when merchants love it. I understand that many businesses, that half the business they do for a year occur between Thanksgiving and Christmas Day. And so for them, that's where the mark for Black Friday began, because that's when they started to get in the black instead of the red. But you know, we don't really understand what Christmas is all about. I want to talk about a history of Christmas celebration today and give you a brief rundown of 2,000 years of Christmas celebrations. And then I want to talk about what the real meaning of Christmas is, because we've missed it. We're going to read two passages. They may seem disjointed when we read them together, but I think it'll become clear as we go through it. Let's read together two passages. First, Isaiah 9:6, and then Philippians 2:8 through 11. Together, let's read. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of those in heaven and of those on earth and those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of the Father. The Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. How do we celebrate Christmas? Well, that's an interesting question. We have 2,000 years of tradition behind us celebrating Christmas. But here's the thing. That's not the way it's always been. What we do today is not what has occurred throughout the centuries. Today is our own adaptation of everything that's going on. You look at the early centuries, the first 350 years of the church. You know how often Christmas was celebrated? I will give you a hint. It wasn't. 350 years the church only had one holiday, and that was Easter. The celebration of the resurrection. That was what they celebrated. But how did this Christmas thing come into even being? We don't even know the day Jesus was born. We've chosen December 25th. It was chosen for us by Pope Julius I. But the thing is, it's inconsistent. It says shepherds were in their fields watching. They wouldn't have been doing that in the middle of winter, i.e. December. So when did it happen? We don't know. Pope Julius I, around 350 A.D., decided we've got to incorporate, we've got to relate culturally to the people around us. And so what Pope Julius did is he decided to make December 25th Jesus' birthday and celebrate that. Why? Because there were a group of people who celebrated Saturnalia. Saturnalia was a Roman pagan feast that went from December 17th and culminated on the 25th. What the Roman pagans did is they picked someone in their midst to become their enemy. And during this time, they would gorge him with food and all the pleasures of life. And then on the 25th, they would kill him. Now, there were other things that went on during this entire period of time. There was widespread intoxication. They went caroling. They went house to house singing. There was one big difference. They did it in the buff. We don't do that today, do we? No, I hope not. It was a pagan ritual, but there were so many people that were involved in it, and they wouldn't become Christians because they would have to give up Saturnalia. And so, let's adapt as a church. Let's adapt and let's relate to culture. And that's exactly what they did. So Pope Julius I said, let's celebrate December 25th, and all you who become Christians can continue to celebrate Saturnalia. Interesting. In addition to that, at the same period of time, there was a group of people who were the Asherías, a significant set. They worshiped trees. They would cut down trees and bring them into their houses and decorate them. So to attract these people into the church said, let's adopt trees as the symbol. And so that's how we got trees involved. Now, the lighting of trees, we blame that on Martin Luther. He's the one who introduced candles to trees. By the way, where are our firemen in here? Robert will tell us that has led to many, many, many deaths and fires. You don't put lighted candles in an oily-based tree. It's just a fire hazard. But it all started with the church trying to adapt to culture and making sure that we accept people who they are and their practices so that they could enjoy Christianity. But is that really what happened? Or has the church become like the world? Now, at the same period of time as Pope Julius, there was this bishop who lived in the town of Myra. His name was Nicholas. And Nicholas was known for his generosity. I mean, there's tales about him. He would put money in socks and throw it through open windows. They didn't have glass windows back then, okay? And so they were open, and he'd throw it in, and it'd land on the mantle of the fireplace. And y'all know what became of Nicholas. He was sainted and became Saint Nicholas. And over the years, that became perverted and became what? Oh, I'll talk more about that guy later. You know, and this was going on. This went on for 1,500 years. And Christmas was more of a pagan holiday, raucous in nature. And please read everything you can into the word raucous. That's what Christmas was and celebrated. I mean, the Protestants came in, in the 1500s, and, they reformed things. At least they brought carols into the church. They still practiced going house to house singing, but they did it clothed. Okay. So it made a big difference. But then things began to shift. You know how the pendulum swings and then the pendulum speeds up? In the 16th century, things began to accelerate in the pendulum swing. Because in the 16th century, with the Protestant Reformation going on, there was a man by the name of Oliver Cromwell. Y'all remember Cromwell? He and his Puritan forces took over England, and they vowed to rid England of all the decadence that they could. So they canceled Christmas. That went over like a lead balloon. So when Charles II was restored, what did he immediately do and was restored to popularity? He restored Christmas. Now, this Puritan thing, it caught on. And where did the Puritans go? Many of them. Where did they go, guys? Here. So the Puritans came here. They came to America, and what was one of the first things they did? As a matter of fact, they canceled Christmas as well here in the United States. They even made it illegal in the United States to mention Santa Claus. And if you got any holiday spirit and you showed holiday spirit, they would fine you 5 shillings. So you would get taxed, if you will. Now, that wasn't all across the United States. There were parts that did celebrate Christmas and others that didn't. The more north you were, the more the Puritans were, the less you saw Christmas being celebrated. Christmas was actually not a recognized holiday in America until it was made official in about 1876. Did you know that? Now, there were places like Jamestown. Now, in Jamestown, Captain John Smith reported that Christmas was celebrated in fine form. Now, he reported that. Well, that brings us to the 18th century. In the 18th century, Santa Claus made his first appearance in publications. It wasn't Santa Claus, it was S-T, Saint, capital A, Claus. Sant A Claus. That was really how it began to first appear. But again, it wasn't universally accepted here in the United States. As a matter of fact, in 1789, what was happening in 1789? Oh, that followed shortly after 1776. On 1789, in the first year of the Constitution of the United States, Congress was in full session on December 25th. It was not celebrated at all. But what turned? What turned? In the 19th century, we see more and more of an attitude of Americans beginning to embrace Christianity, or at least Christmas. And it changed it from a raucous carnival into a family-oriented tradition. Still not much about worship, but there's a guy in 1809 by the name of Washington Irving. Anybody hear of him? If you've been to school, you have. Or at least in the past, you would have. He wrote under a pseudonym, Diedrich Knickerbocker. What a name. He wrote a thing called The History of New York. And in it, he talks about Santa Claus coming into New York riding in a wagon. 3 years later, he updated it, and the wagon flew over trees into New York. So that was 3 years afterwards. Then in 1821, William Gilley printed a poem about Santa E. Claus. Santa E. Claus. Santa Claus, who was dressed in fur and rode in a sleigh driven by one reindeer. It became pretty popular until 1822, and this is where some accounts differ. But there was a dentist by the name of Clement Clark Moore. He is the one who is believed, and it's debated between he and Henry Livingston Jr., wrote a poem entitled An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, which was later, the title was changed to 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And in it, Santa is an elf. And he's driven in a miniature sleigh equipped with 8 reindeer. Now, these are their names. Blitzen. I'm not mispronouncing this. Just pay attention. Blitzen. Just like in the football games, you blitz them. You blitz them. There was Blitzen and Comet and Cupid and Dancer and Dasher and Donder. I'm not mispronouncing it. It's Donder, Prancer, and Vixen. By the way, they later changed two of the names to Donner and Blitzen. Okay, they did that. And it caught on. It was very popular. And the 19th century was a time of social economic turmoil. And there was a lot of class interaction. And people didn't get along too well, especially around Christmas time. And there was disenchantment with the raucous nature of Christmas. As a matter of fact, the New York City Council in 1828 established the New York Police Department because of all the riots that broke out at Christmas. So New York City is thankful to its police department, which was founded because of Christmas. On the negative side, it was a riot after all these things. In 1841, there was a guy by the name of J.W. Parkinson who began to make Christmas more into a mercantile item. He hired a guy to dress up in a Kris Kringle suit and climb up the chimney of his department store to attract attention. Wow. It was creeping on. Before the Civil War, the North and South were divided. Not just on the issue of slavery, but on the issue of Christmas. The North, well, they had that puritanical element still in it. And so they didn't like Christmas. They liked Thanksgiving. They said that was more appropriate. But Christmas, nah. But the South loved Christmas. As a matter of fact, Christmas was made an official holiday first in the South. In 1836, Alabama passed a declaration making Christmas a holiday. 2 years later, they were followed by Arkansas and Louisiana. And so the North, and not so much the South, they began to embrace it. And it was something of a divisive nature, but people even began to use it in psychological warfare. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln, he charged Thomas Nast. He was an illustrator for Harper's Magazine. He challenged him to draw Santa Claus with the Union Army. This was devastating to many of the people in the South. It was truly psychological warfare. Abraham Lincoln used psychological warfare, using Santa Claus as an aspect of it. During all this time, do you know how people got into the minds and hearts of the nation? They wrote about Christmas in children's books and women's magazines, telling them about decorating their home, and children presenting these myths and ideas and all these different things. But by the last quarter of the century, people were enamored with baking and caroling and the most important thing, shopping for Christmas. Marketing has made Christmas what it is today. In 1897, there was a guy by the name of Francis P. Church. He was the editor of the New York Sun. And an 8-year-old girl wrote a letter. Her name was Virginia O'Hanlon. And her question was, is there really a Santa Claus? And his response has become well known. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. All this brought us into the 20th century. The image of Santa Claus by this time has been well adapted. He's a bearded, white-haired, overweight man dressed in red and fur and all these different things. Red with white trim. Really, we can thank the image that we have of Santa Claus today to Haddon Sundblom. Anybody know who Haddon Sundblom is? He was the illustrator for Coca-Cola. And starting in 1831, he drew Santa Claus with Coca-Cola. And from 1931 to 1964, every year he illustrated Coca-Cola and Santa Claus as intimate together. We still see Coke and Santa, don't we? They have the copyright, by the way. In 1939, there's a guy by the name of Robert May. He worked for Montgomery Ward. Y'all remember? Anybody remember Montgomery Ward? I don't know if they're in business anymore, but they used to send out catalogs, which you work when you're on a farm and don't have indoor plumbing. They're very handy. Okay. But he wrote a poem. And this, you've got to understand something about Robert May, is that he was a small, spindly, not very strong person. And when he was growing up, people wouldn't play with him because he was so small and out of character. So he wrote a poem entitled Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which is really a story about himself. And if you subscribe to Montgomery Ward, he would send you a copy of the poem for free. 10 years later, a guy by the name of Johnny Marks, you may not have heard of him, he took the poem and wrote a song entitled Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The number 2 all-time song about Christmas. Number 2, only behind White Christmas. Oh, and the guy sang it. A guy by the name of Gene Autry. We ought to know Gene Autry around here, all right? Gene Autry sang his best, most popular song of all time for Gene Autry. And what has happened? Christmas. Can I pervert Shakespeare? Of course I can pervert Shakespeare. We have turned much ado into nothing. We have changed totally what Christmas is all about. Christmas was started as a compromise. The celebration was a compromise with paganism. And today what it has become, it's become Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Oh, we now have Giving Tuesday. I like that. At least we put something spiritual into it. And it's become all about what? Oh, you could say family. What do we leave out? Jesus. It's all about Santa Claus. We ought to hang him. We ought to hang him because he has perverted what Christmas is. And I'm sorry, children, you had to hear that from a pastor, but really, we ought to. Because that's not what Christmas is about. We should not worship the day Jesus was born. We don't even know the day he was born. We have to understand what the meaning of Christmas is really about. And to do that, we have to turn to Philippians 2. For he left the throne of glory and humbled himself and took upon him the form of a servant and did what? Became a man that he might bear the sin of the world and die on the cross for us. The real reason for Christmas, the purpose of our birth, though we like to think about the sweet baby Jesus. I love Geraldine. Great song, great old-time spiritual. Sweet little baby Jesus. The only reason he became a man is so that he could die And to do that, he had to be born. And so this was just a means. It's not the end. We kind of celebrate Christmas as the end. He came. No! He came to die, to pay the penalty for our sin. He was born for you and for me to pay the debt that we owe for sin. We misunderstand. We put Jesus in a manger and we leave him there. Sweet little Jesus. No, he grew up, and where we see him most prominent is hanging on a cross. My neighborhood, like many of yours, is decorated. People decorate their outside. Anybody, how many of y'all engage in that? Y'all like to do it? I'm not. It's not that I'm opposed to it. It's just I'm lazy. You got to take it down afterward. Now, we decorate inside our house, but I don't decorate outside. But I see all these elaborate decorations. And in my neighborhood, there's only one that I think is great. Only one. And it is a 6-foot wooden cross wrapped in lights. I said, now that's got it. That's the one that pictures what this is all about. Now, please don't get me wrong. I am not Scrooge. I love gifts. I love giving presents. Our family got together yesterday because we're headed to Arkansas tomorrow to visit my mom. But we got together. We exchanged gifts. We had a wonderful family time together. We ate too much. You know, all those, I guess gluttony is sin. All those things we enjoy and do, I'm not opposed to those things. But the thing that we have to do is refocus on Jesus. Every year before we exchange gifts, I've shared this with you before, I take out Luke 2 and I read it. And then we pray and then we exchange gifts. Trying to remember that the exchange of gifts is trying to remember what the Magi did, what Nicholas did, those sort of things, just as a gift. But the greatest gift had already been given, which was Jesus himself. That was the gift. The cross is what it's about, not the manger. The cross. And that's what Philippians 2 says. When you look at Philippians 2:8, it says, and Jesus was found in fashion as a man. You look in the Greek, this is for Dennis. I always try to throw something in for Dennis here. The Greek word is schema. It's very interesting, that word. That word is used throughout Greek writings when a king would lay aside his garments and take upon him the garments of a poor man and walk among the people so that he could hear directly what the people were saying and thinking. What did Jesus do? He fashioned himself schema. He threw off the glory. He veiled it. He left the throne where he is and has and always will be God. And he disguised himself. Can I say that? He put himself in fashion as a man so that people wouldn't automatically know who he is, but they would be who they are. He schemaed them. That's what he did. He put on the temporal flesh and put his immortal being inside it so that he could walk among humanity and know us and share himself with us. The interesting thing, all the stories we read about schema generally are just that, stories. But there's a difference. Jesus is real. He really did this. He humbled himself. And you look at the humility. That word, humbled himself. It's an interesting word because it means to be willing to stoop to whatever is necessary. Humility is willing to lower yourself. There's nothing higher than God, and any step beneath is to lower himself. And he lowered himself to the form of something that he created, mankind. He left the splendor of heaven and took upon the dirt of earth. He humbled himself and became obedient. You look at the word obedient, it's composed of two words, one meaning under and the other to hear. To hear under, which means you place yourself under the words that you hear. Obedience is what? Submitting to the words that you hear. And when it comes to the Word of God, obedience is what? Putting yourself under the words that were spoken by God. And he humbled himself and took upon him the form of a man, becoming obedient. Obedient to his Father, his own will. And that's what we're like. That's what our Father is like. That's what Jesus is like. That's what Christmas is all about. It's about Jesus humbling himself so that he could obey the Father, come to earth, and take our sin away. What's the real meaning of Christmas? It's not a babe in a manger. It's Jesus coming to earth to die for our sin. We have no way of paying for our own sin. The best an imperfect person can do is imperfect works. All our righteousnesses are as filth, rags to God. And so for our sin to be paid for, it took the sacrifice of God himself to do it. He came to earth to die for our sin. When we look at the manger, what we should see is the cross. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes. You know what swaddling clothes were used for? For the purpose of wrapping a dead body. Even in his birth, we see he was wrapped for death. And so for you and I today, how do we respond to this? I think our response is this, first and foremost. We need to worship Jesus as he is, the Son of God. He was the Son of Man, yes, but he is and always has been, always will be, the Son of God. Let's make Christmas about Jesus. Not about computers, cars, houses, clothes. Let's not make it about money or gift cards. Let's make it about Jesus. Let's worship and serve him. If you're a believer, make sure that's a priority. If you're here today and you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, let me call you to this. I call you to faith in Jesus, not Santa Claus, not a manger, but a cross. Belief in the Son of God who came, died on the cross, paid our sin, and gives us the opportunity to believe in him. If you're here today and don't know Jesus, I call on you. Receive the gift of God, the gift of Jesus, by believing in him. Would you join me in prayer? If you're here today and don't have a personal relationship with Jesus, let me ask you to consider his claims. He claims to be God. And I believe that wholeheartedly. He claims to have come to earth to die for our sin, pay the penalty for our sin. And I believe that. I believe that He loves us totally and completely, even in our sin, but allows us to make a choice whether we believe or not. I call on you today to believe in Jesus. How do you do that? Well, first, admit your own sin. Turn to Jesus, say, Jesus, I've sinned. And then turn to Jesus and believe in Him. Tell Him, Jesus, I believe you are the Son of God who died for my sin and rose again. And then choose Jesus right now. Say, Jesus, I receive you into my heart as my Savior. And I will follow you as my Lord. For those of us who have already made that decision, help each of us not to be caught up in the trappings of a day, but instead be overwhelmed by a God who would humble Himself and take upon Him the form of a man. Help us to worship and worship you only.